Is my screen visible?
It's visible, yes.
Okay, okay, that's great.
Yeah, it's moving also.
Okay,
It's
okay, that's
yeah,
good.
it's working very good.
Okay, so right. All right, so good morning to all of you, and thanks for inviting me for this talk. And this is a set of slides which I have been giving off late to a few places over the last few months. So it's more or less the similar thing, but I guess I don't know if you've already seen that. So essentially, we'll talk about orthogonal time frequency space modulation today. However, what I feel is that it's also important to talk about some things which are necessary and around the domain and how we finally arrive at OTFS. There are some aspects of 5G, some aspects of the channel. My talk will be more or less hovering around a few things which will finally lead us to OTFS. So we'll see OTFS halfway through or towards the end of the talk. Yes, so the outline is we'll talk a little bit about the radio access technology design because OTFS is end of the day radio access technology. We'll talk about aspects of radio channel as I mentioned. We'll also talk about the design of 5G NR waveform that has some clue or some reasons why we are talking about OTFS today, and finally we'll go into OTFS. We'll present most of the results which we have developed through our works over here. That's broadly the scope of our presentation today. So as we usually look at when we look at radio access technology, we would usually try to see what has been the development path over the past few decades. And if you see this particular picture, what we find is that it's basically you can trace back from 1970s to up to 2020, which is already over, and then we are going ahead towards 2030. And of the many different things, if you ask someone what has been changing, a straightforward thing is the data rate has been increasing. That has been one of the common features. However, when we look at 5G today, there are various multiple aspects which has changed, and which is not necessarily data rate, but also the kind of network, the kind of RAN, the kind of services, and there's been a lot of development on the core network aspect also. So along with that, if we ask people who actually work on radio access technology, and if you focus on another very important change that has happened, is rather it's a change which is more observable, is the access technology. So if you look at one of the earliest things, that is the 1G, so-called, there was nothing called 1G, but since there is 2G and so on, we have this 1G, which was essentially analog voice. So the access technique was FDMA, frequency division multiplexing access, which is pretty well understood now. Then when it moved to 2G in the 1980s to 1990s, when it was developed, so this is the period when things were developed and slowly started deploying. In 1990s, there was deployment across India. So the main access technology was changed from FDMA to TDMA. So we're moving into digital transmission methodologies. Along with it, CDMA, code division multiple access, also came into play. And then the requirements changed and we moved on to 3G simply because 2G provided digital services. Then data services came into play between after 2G was deployed, 2.5G. So you have GPRS and you have Edge. And then as people started getting used to data, there was more demand for data services, multimedia services. Higher bandwidth requirement came into play. 2G had its own limitations in terms of equalization and signal processing. So 3G was invented, you can call it, where the multiple path interference was handled through rake receivers, and the access technology was mainly wideband CDMA. So you had a bandwidth of nearly 5 megahertz, rake receivers, advanced equalizers. With this, we were now used to the multimedia services, and there was more demand for data services. So when we moved from 3G, the voice and data, they all got merged together, and it was all IP based services. So when we were in 1G, it was only voice circuit switching. In 2G, it was digital circuit switching, digital voice circuit switching. When we moved to 3G, there were two paths, one for the circuit switch, one for the packet switch. The packet switch was for data and circuit switch was for voice. When we moved to 4G, everything was packet switched. So if you look at the 4G deployment, which is from Reliance Jio, they have an entirely packet switch services. They do not provide service for backward compatibility. Thereon, everything changed. The way voice service was delivered was changed, and the metrics, the performance analysis got changed. So going beyond 4G, or rather in 4G, the new access technology from WCDMA got changed to OFDMA, because you're moving from a 5 megahertz bandwidth to a 20 megahertz bandwidth. When we have 20 megahertz bandwidth, there's a four-fold increase in bandwidth, and hence signal processing complexity become too high for WCDMA receivers to handle the multipaths. And OFDMA had a natural resilience to multipath, and therefore it was a choice. Again, the same trend carried on, and there was further requirement for higher spectrals and higher bands, higher bandwidths, and various other services, which led us to 5G. So although here there was not a huge change in the access technology, fundamentally it remained OFDM, but there was a numerology, which we'll talk about today. Along with this, millimeter wave became one of the aspects of the transmission technology, and there were various changes in the core network aspects also, where you hear about the network slicing and software-defined networks, as well as edge and cloud services. They were almost a reality when we talk about 5G. However, with time, you get slowly used to it, and there is already a need that what will be the requirement for 6G, and that is where things are now being shaped. What would be the requirement, and what kind of services would be required? What is the data rate that needs to be supported? And what kind of mobility conditions need to be supported, which is leading us towards the direction of 6G, where cell-less architectures, NOMA, terahertz communication, OTFS, these things are being discussed. Research work has been done quite a bit. Quite a bit is still being done. They are required. So over next few years will be crucial for making a decision or the technologies that are going to be there in 6G. Thereafter, the next few years, there will be more formalization and standardization aspects of 6G that would come into play. And tentatively around 2030, you're going to get 6G, maybe a little bit before. And initially, if you look at if you trace the timeline, more or less every 10 years, there has been a change in the generations. So people are expecting that things will be faster, but then again, there is an economy and commercial aspects which would also play a role. And roughly speaking, 10 years is what is happening. The new generations are going to come up. However, if you talk to the industry people who are actually developing these technologies, they rather would talk in terms of a continuous development of the telecom standards. So where partitioning into 3G, 4G, 5G, 6G are not very well appreciated. Rather, it's an evolution, and they rather talk in terms of releases, the next version rather of the technology, just like the next version of the software. So that's the broad view of how things are going on in the domain of so-called mobile communication and generations. So when we look at the telecommunication networks, it's a very, very large thing. It's a behemoth today that you have, the huge amount of things in the access. There are a lot of things on the core network, transmission technologies, several things are going on. So we usually divide the development into two parts. One is the core network, which is more to deal with the routing and backhaul. And the other part is the access network, which is more to deal with the user connectivity aspect, the last mile of it. That's the access network. And you would usually call it the radio access or the wireless access. So the pictures represented gives you a hint towards the kind of domain that we are talking about. And these two require different kind of expertise in designing. Different challenges exist. They're quite distinct in terms of the deployment solutions, methodologies. So we usually have two different paths, and they go together. So whatever we're going to talk about is fundamentally on the access part of the technology and not in the core network part, just for a clarification. Access network, again, you can divide it into two ways. That means the wired access, or the radio access, or the wireless access. And again, what we are going to talk about is the radio access part of it. So when we talk about a radio access network, there again, you would rather see it as being consistent of the radio access network architecture and radio access technology or the air interface. This terminology is not very popular, but that's what actually means. So these essentially talk about the signals which go into the air from the device and from there into the device at the other end. So essentially the link as well as access. So when you see these, they might appear that the access network is with respect to base station deployment and layouts. There's a process is different, the planning is different. Whereas on the other side, you talk about the modern signal processing algorithms, but it must be known or it must be remembered that they are highly coupled, because how you lay out the base stations, what's the architecture is essentially dependent upon what kind of signal processing advantages you have introduced into the system. For instance, the link budget or the link margin for GSM is very different from the link budget or link margin of OFDMA systems. In OFDMA systems, you have an option of providing scalable bandwidth. You can provide multiple slots. So that way it provides you a lot of flexibility into the system, which influences finally the deployment of base stations and the kind of interconnectivity between base stations that is required to support such systems. Essentially, we are talking about a coupling that exists between the network architecture that evolves, the access network architecture, and the radio access technology. So they both more or less go hand in hand and they build each other. When we go a little bit deeper into the radio access technology or the air interface, we find that the most important layers, the so-called OSI layers, which are mostly developed or which are most active, where most of the technology development has been going on, are the physical layer, the data link layer, and the MAC layer. Right? So the physical layer mainly talks about the signals, data link layer about the link parameters, and the MAC layer is about access. So when you have all these three things, what has happened over the past 2 decades rather is the cross-layer optimization has been into play. Earlier, physical layer was designed with respect to bits and signals. Link layer was only with respect to control parameters, and MAC with only with respect to access like TDMA, CDMA, and so on. But over time, we find that the MAC layer or the access, okay, there could be, we would also call it as RRC and RLC and those kind of things in terms of telecom domain. These layers, the data link layer and the MAC layer, they work intricately and hand in hand with the physical layer. That means they take parameters from the physical layer, for example, channel state information. Using them, they take decisions on the link as well as on the access. They also take decision based on the traffic. So there is a merging between the demand which is placed by the traffic and what is available in terms of channel coefficients. End of the day, you reach the channel. So depending upon the channel, which is what is available, as well as the demand, you try to optimize the resources, right? So when we talk about cross-layer optimization, we are actually talking about the efficient utilization of radio resources, because that's what is the physical layer made up of. Because we are talking of optimization, so obviously it means utilization and rather efficient utilization. If we look at, so when we finally come to the term radio resource, so radio resource is basically those entities which provide you the facility to transfer information from one end to the other end, where in between you have the wireless link. So all the things that consist or which are utilized, they form the resources. So power is one of the most essential resources, because if you don't have power, you don't do anything. So how you utilize the power, how you spend the power is what is part of optimization here. Frequency essentially means the bandwidth, how you allocate the bandwidth, right? So that depends upon the channel conditions. Then time, can you schedule the things in time? That's also another important resource, right? So you have an option. So this is a parameter in that sense. Codes, when you talk of the spread spectrum communication, or you talk in terms of code books. So codes also play a role. Spatial layers, by virtue of multiple antennas. So you have multiple parameters or dimensions which you have to which you have at your hand, so that you can utilize them in the best possible way in providing service between the two ends of the wireless link. So that's where we are talking about the radio access technology. You're accessing the radio medium or the wireless medium. And when you say you're accessing, you're basically allocating portions of these resources to the traffic or the demand that is being placed. All right. And these are basically the air interface, because it's about the signal going into the air from one end and received. So everything that comes into this part is part of so-called radio access technology, or we also term it as the air interface. So when we are talking about the radio resource, as I've just mentioned, the fundamental element of the radio resource is that unit, which is the smallest unit in time and frequency, and you have to allocate a power. So that is the most critical, or the so-called atom in the radio resource arena, right? So that is what builds the entire system. So when we talk about the radio resource element, it's the basic unit which carries information. So we start from this point. This is the one which is carrying the bits for the last mile or wherever you have a wireless link. So that is the building block, you can say, the cell in terms of living organisms, or the atoms in terms of material. So for us, this is a resource. The basic element is the radio resource element. And why do I mention it? The reason for mentioning it, because it's an outcome of signal design, because that is where all the designs of transmitting signal goes into it. For example, when you're talking about pulse shape, it's basically this radio resource element we are talking about. So if we say, oh, I mean, how is it related, or what is it influencing? So we must understand that this depends upon the user requirement. So when we looked at the slide where we had FDMA, TDMA, CDMA, WCDMA, OFDMA, or OTFS, whatever we talk about, we are essentially talking about this particular radio resource element. This is the smallest unit. And why is it so important, and how is it influencing? If we trace again from 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, and 6G, what has made these changes happen is the user requirements. The demand from users have changed in terms of services. That means initially we were asking for analog voice, then we asked for digital, then we asked for digital data, right? Multimedia, high-speed data, 4K video. Then we also asked for, while we are moving on a vehicle, we would get those digital services. While we are moving in a train around 400 kilometers per hour, we should still get those services. Now we are talking about those services being made available through drones. So we are talking about services, we are talking about demands on one end, we're talking about services together, but end of the day, it is this radio resource element which ultimately carries the information. So this design is dependent upon those requirements. So we will see them slowly. How does it influence? Now we talk about the channel, because obviously the radio resource element is part of the resource which is actually going through the channel. Channel is the one between the transmitter and the receiver. It's the part of the link. So when we place a requirement from the user end, for example, we are asking for high-speed connectivity. That means, let's say, a few Mbps, tens of Mbps. So we are saying at what rate the bits are going to go through. On a very intuitive scale, we are talking about the bandwidth. So typically we all know the moment we are asking for a higher data rate, we are actually talking about a higher bandwidth, right? So the moment you talk about higher bandwidth, the channel characteristics come into play. The questions come up, whether it's a flat fading, whether it's a frequency fading, whether it's a frequency selective fading, whether it's a time selective fading, whether it's a slow fading. So all these things come into play. So depending upon the situations, we would have to design our radio resource element so that it goes through from the transmitter to the receiver in as undistorted manner as possible. That means it is least destroyed while it goes through the channel. So that means we are talking at a very, very high level about user requirements, but that translates to the physical channel condition, and then it influences the elemental design, which finally leads to the transmission technologies like TDMA, CDMA, OFDMA, and so on. So what we understand is that the entire system at this end is dependent on the channel, and hence to design such a system is very important to understand the channel. That's a fundamental thing which we should all know, that without understanding the channel thoroughly well, these kind of solutions don't come up. Now, this is a quotation I have taken from a book by Professor Ramji Prasad, and which is so important. I mean, those who work in this domain, they would easily appreciate that the understanding of channel is what influences how these technologies evolve over time. And I again quote a sentence from the book where he says that this is how I used to emphasize in my lectures. That's what Professor Ramji Prasad says, the importance of channel model for designing of radio interface for wireless communication. And this is just not a phrase to keep the students' attention. I've taken it exactly from his book. The channel models really are foundation on which the mobile communication systems are built. So just to emphasize that we start from a very, very high level user requirement. I want to drive at 400 kilometers per hour and I want to get a YouTube which is 4K without distortion. But just try to see that it boils down to your understanding of channel, then only you come up with the signal design, and finally the things get implemented. Now, we have talked about the signal generation. Each signal generation also has its associated receiver design. So when we move from 1G to 2G and 2G to 3G, when we encountered 2G, there was maximum likelihood sequence estimation equalization based receivers. So when we move to 3G, that means we are going from a low bitrate requirement to higher bitrate requirement. The bandwidth increase. The multipath fading phenomena was now getting introduced. So you realized that the GMSK signal, which is so nicely designed, which is low peak to average power ratio, you have a very fantastic equalizer for it. It works so well. But when you scale it to the 5 megahertz bandwidth, the complexity becomes unmanageable in terms of implementation. Why? Because power consumption is a factor. You would like your handheld devices to last long, and therefore you would have to design a new methodology. So when you go to CDMA, you find that instead of going for MLSE, you have another architecture, which is the rake receiver architecture, which is a low complexity implementation which can handle multipaths. When you move further ahead, you find that I need a bigger bandwidth of 20 megahertz, 40 megahertz, 100 megahertz. Then you find that the receivers which you have designed, the signals which you have designed is not suitable, again because of implementation. So you move towards a system which is less complex. And probably you know that OFDM has the beautiful advantage of being very low complexity because it uses FFT architecture, which has a very, very low complexity in terms of implementation. So you can handle bigger bandwidths, you can handle multipaths. You should design a new transmission signal, that is the radio resource element, and hence you must design a corresponding receiver. The rake receiver is no longer suitable. You can do it in a much easier manner over here. That's how evolutions are happening. And again, requirements going down to what is the channel condition, design the signal, and then go to the receiver. So that's how the flows are. And when you design the receivers, now look at how things happen. 1G, 2G, they were frequency planning based systems. You would allocate frequencies for base stations. When you go to CDMA, this frequency planning concepts is not required anymore. You can go for a reuse of 1. When you go to frequency reuse 1, the way you deploy base stations, the way you do handover, the way you allocate resources, that gets changed completely. Therefore, we can see that this entire thing influences the radio access network, how you place the base stations, how do they get interconnected, how do they manage the handover, what kind of control channels get shifted. That means it is influencing your entire architecture. It's not just one particular component. And end of the day, it gives or it defines what is 2G, what is 3G, what is 4G, what is 5G, what is 6G. That means it gives a character, it gives an identity, it makes it unique in a way. And that's how you can distinguish the difference in technologies that has evolved over time. And this is mainly at the radio access technology or at the air interface level. Well, there is a lot of development on the core network side also to catch up or to match the new changes that are happening at the air interface side. So going further, there's another aspect of the radio resource or the radio element, which is called the radio access technology. So we are talking about the element before, now we're talking about the access technology, which is also part of the air interface. So access is there to allow you sharing of the resource, because the spectrum is the same in a small geographic region. When you change the geographic region from one place to another, you have a different resource because of the spatial distance. The signals don't travel that much. But within a small range, the signal attenuation is not so much that you can simply reuse the frequency within a certain short distance. So the methodologies of sharing the resources come into play. TDMA, FDMA were there, but now there are different technologies where based on the channel condition, you start allocating resources. So channel state information based resource allocation. So radio resource allocation is now the new terminology that has been in place for the last decade or last couple of decades, more or less, you can say. Okay. So the newer things are non-orthogonal multiple access, and if we get an opportunity, we'll talk about them also. So the idea is that you optimize the overall utilization of radio resources. How? To provide the required QoS to the end users. That means there might be multiple users. One might require a higher data rate with a certain bit error rate constraint. Another might sustain a lower data rate with a different bit error rate constraint. For example, if we are talking about video, you require a very high data rate, but your error probability requirement is some value X. Whereas if I have a file to download, you can sustain a lower bit rate, but you would not allow bits to go into error, right? So you have an opposing set of requirements, but this knowledge can be utilized in providing more bandwidth to the user who is asking for a real-time service, and lesser bandwidth for the user who is asking for non-real-time service. So you can provide more time to that user, and whereas the user who is requiring high bitrate, you provide higher bandwidth to that user. So as per the dynamic conditions, you keep on designing this. Now, if you look at the challenge, the user requirements are also changing continuously with time. With the time of the day, the density of users, the traffic arrival, there are different models of traffic arrivals, and the traffic descriptions, they keep on fluctuating. So the job of radio resource allocation unit, or that box or that algorithm which sits there, is to ensure that you continuously match the requirements or the demands with the supply, that is the channel or the radio resource resources that are available with you. So that is also a very important part of the radio access technology or the air interface. So if you look at now the air interface or radio access technology, it begins with the channel. You design the radio resource element, you design the receiver, then you design the link or allocation methodologies. Finally, that would help you in coming up with an architecture, network design architecture, which is feasible. And this evolution process goes on as you go from different generation to different generations. So it's basically a large set of things that happen when you talk of radio access technology. So if you look at how do they design, what are the key performance indicators? Spectral efficiency, when we talk of radio resource element design. Out of band radiation, that you would not like signals to interfere with each other. Reliability, when you're talking about receivers. Complexity, that's of course a very important factor. When you go to link adaptation, radio resource allocation is the quality of service of the different users. Multiple access. Coverage, when you're going to radio access network design. You would also look at the energy efficiency part of it. Interference that is happening. So there are multiple key performance indicators along with various parameters which you can play around with or you can design. Together forms the ultimate design of radio access technology, which you term as 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, and 6G. So in short, it's a complex system level design domain. It's not a simple elementary design that we are dealing with over here. And whatever works we have done here throughout the last few years or maybe decades, you can say, it spans over 4G. There were a couple of books which we have been able to author. We have authored also one book on 5G, which collects the essential evolution of air interface towards 5G. And we are also, this book is in pipeline. It's not yet out in the market, but hopefully in a month or two maximum, this will also be out, which will contain the fundamentals or elements of OTFS, which is part of the radio access technology. So with that background, which stresses upon the understanding of channel, I would like to share with you some aspects of the radio channel which we have been spending time with, so that I expose to you certain features or certain things which still remain uh, out there for you to explore and understand more details which can lead to better system design in the future. So I'll show you basically a couple of works that we have done. So one of the aspects which we have investigated is the line of sight parameter. Now, why we are talking of line of sight? If you look at what 5G has been going into, they are talking about millimeter wave. So when you look at millimeter wave, the line of sight is a very, very important thing, because blockage causes heavy attenuation, and they're talking about these intelligent reflecting surfaces and so on and so forth, to ensure that you get a specular component. Specular is a strong component which comes towards the user with a specific direction. There is no spread of the signal across a certain set of directions. So that's a specular or a line of sight. Okay. If you look at visible light, that's also line of sight. If you look at terahertz, that will also be line of sight. If you look at the dense deployment scenarios that we are getting into, where we talk of ultra dense networks, there is also a large line of sight possibility that is coming into play. So what's there in line of sight? Because line of sight has been ignored in the past few years, whereas earlier, if you look at satellite communications, the focus is mainly line of sight. Whereas when we designed mobile communications, in fact, 2G, 3G or 4G, the focus was mainly on non-line of sight situations, because that is a more difficult situation to address. But you'll find that line of sight is also not so straightforward. I mean, there is also a lot of issues. When you're designing system for non-line of sight, it does not guarantee that it's going to give you the same performance as in line of sight situation. Because for instance, when you look at MIMO, your performance is going to degrade because the channel correlation becomes very high over there. Okay, so let's see what I'm going to tell you over here. So typically we have a transmitter and receiver. There is a direct line of sight path, and there are multiple reflected paths which arrive at the receiver, right, from various different angles. So the signals that arrive at the receiver, they arrive at different times and angles, because this is the shortest path. Then you have another set of paths which arrive with own delays, another delay, and of course, since the delays are different, they must have been traveling at different angles, because the path length won't be different otherwise. So you have a different variation of angular spread that happens over here, a spread in the delay dimension, which is the time. So there is delay and angles which are variable, which are vary at the receiver end. And the common way of representing the line of sight is the Rician K factor. So we studied the Rician K factor in the situations which we are going to encounter in the near future. So if you look at the distribution of Rician K factor in the sub 6 gigahertz, which is commonly used like 3-4 gigahertz systems or 2 gigahertz systems, we find that Rician K factor has a wide range of variation. So this is for the 60 gigahertz. This is the red one is for the 6 gigahertz. So for both the cases, the Rician K factor is not a single parameter. This is the message that I want to convey. Usually we simulate the Rician K factor 10, get your results, and that's it. But that's not good enough. This is just to show you that you do not encounter a single Rician K factor. It's not to be ignored. It's very important, because you get a range of performance values which give you a hint towards system design. So this is for the 802.11, where there is a larger range of variation of Rician K factor. So what happens if we look at it? When we talk about very high frequency bands, usually we are nowadays also talking about the directive antennas that are to be used, antenna arrays which can form beams in certain directions. Okay. So when you have the beams pointing towards each other, you have a certain situation. You can also have beams pointing in other directions. So obviously you can see that if your beam is pointing towards the blue, that is the upward direction, you lose out the line of sight, because the line of sight would be coming almost in the null region. So that would affect your Rician K factor, and that would affect your bit error rate end of the day. And that bit error rate, if you have a certain requirement in terms of a reliability, would influence your throughput. If it influences your throughput, it would influence your deployment of access points, your transmission technology, and so on. So if we look at this fluctuation of angles as you change this beam direction on the x-axis, you'll find that the Rishon K factor has again a variation. It's fluctuating for the 60 gigahertz. Okay. If we look at the sub 6 gigahertz region, we are talking about the error probability now. Okay. So what we find is that if you use the Rishon K factor, that is a single value of Rishon K factor, which is usually specified in channel models, even in 3GPPs and so on, you get a certain bit error rate performance. Whereas if you use the configuration A, as I have just pointed out in this slide, the configuration A, which is here in this direction, you get a much better bit error rate. Whereas if you go to configuration B, you will find that the bit error rate matches with the Rishon K factor that is given in the channel model. See, now you trace back the margin that got created. You have a margin of nearly around 7-8 dB or more. There's a huge margin of SNR that gets created. So 7-8 dB of difference in performance would influence how many access points you're going to deploy, where you're going to deploy, what kind of access technologies you're going to use. So how did we come up with this? There's a detailed study of this 3GPP channel model, its implementation, and so on and so forth, that led us to the understanding that you simply cannot use a single parameter value and go ahead and design a new system. It's not going to work. You have to look at the dynamicity of the system, to understand in details, and then come up with a proposal which takes advantage of all possible variations. Because if you trace back, you'll find one of the earliest things in terms of dynamic adaptation was power control. This power control was a slow power control initially. Then we moved into fast power control, which adapted to the fast fading conditions. Then there was link adaptation, you adapt the rates. So initial rates were slow adaptation, then there's a fast adaptation, there's an outer loop link adaptation. So we are talking about adapting the rates based on the angular variation of the signals. Okay. What we conclude is that the Rishon K parameter for a link, for one particular link between a transmitter and receiver, is dependent upon the antenna gain pattern, the cluster angle of arrival, the angle of departure, the angular spread, the power angular spectrum, the time of arrival, and so on and so forth. And it's different from the Rishon K factor provided in the channel. That only gives you an average value. Please keep in mind, it gives you an average value and you can only do that much. So if you go into the details, you are exploring or you're exposing the variations that are feasible. And it varies because of variation in antenna orientation or cluster position. Now these clusters are the reflectors, which you have no control on, because you have only a control on where you can deploy your access point, and you hardly have control on where the user will be either. So these variations are part of the system. And it's influenced by the band of frequencies that are being used for the transmission. So there's a wide range of variation on the band of frequencies also. So this tells us that whenever we go ahead with designing of such systems, we must explore the channel conditions even in greater details. So then going further, we will talk about the full dimension MIMO. Again, it's the 3GPP channel model. And there again, we'll tell you another aspect, what we have done in terms of designing systems for future. So these models, these 3GPP channel models, they provide with you detailed specifications of how you can generate the channel coefficients. All right. So channel coefficients essentially capture the baseband representation of the physical channel for situations where signals arrive through multiple reflections and scattering in a typical environment. All right. And they provide you with the power delay profile. They provide you with the power angular distribution. In other words, they provide you with the statistical description of the channel coefficients in baseband. All right. So, and on the other hand, on the extreme other hand, when you study about these MIMO characteristics for systems, you would find that people are using analytical channel models. So on one hand, we have empirical channel models. On the other hand, we have analytical channel models. These analytical channel models are very, very handy, very, very useful, mathematically pretty nice to work with. Not so nice, but it's good enough. You can form equations, which you can solve through numerical techniques. But on the other hand, if you're using empirical models, you have to go through a huge range of simulation steps. All right. So let's look at, I mean, this is the set of description of the channel profile, how you should generate the channel coefficients. And if you look into the steps of generation of channel coefficients, what you'll find is that depending upon the scenarios, look at this, set the scenario, whether it's an urban scenario, whether it's a rural macro scenario, whether it's a dense deployment, whether it's an indoor scenario. Then you assign conditions, whether it is line of sight, non-line of sight. Thereafter, you calculate the path loss, generate correlated large-scale parameters. That means angle spread, delay spread, shadowing, region parameters. So these are also heavily correlated. So there is a detailed methodology how you generate them. Generate the multipath delays, generate power clusters as is shown here. So, right. Then there's a coupling procedure of all these different things. Then you generate the cross polarizations, certain few more steps, and finally you generate the channel coefficients. It's a huge sequence of procedures. Well, you also apply the path loss, which is the additional attenuation factor, to generate these channel coefficients which you use in simulations. Why would you do it, if you ask? Now, these coefficients are from realistic conditions. That means whatever scheme you analyze, these will give you a hint towards how good your solution will be for a real deployment, because they give scenarios and channel conditions or models for realistic conditions. Using these models only, they have come up with the 3G standard or the 4G standard or the 5G standard. The evaluation is initially done in these things, these models, and these models have been made from real data collected. So this channel model is a huge activity from which they get these kind of models which are used in simulation. You cannot go ahead and do a test directly. So these are simply showing you the range of parameters that are used for such models. Okay. So what we have done in this context is, as I was mentioning, that this range of steps allows you to generate simulation coefficient for simulation, which is very, very time consuming, cumbersome, although they are very close to reality. The opposite end, you have analytical models, good, handy, but they are far, far away from the actual models. And this we understood only after going through all of these details. Otherwise, you could generate n number of papers with those analytical channel models. So I'll come back to this slide later on. So if we look at the correlations, all right, let me explain. So I'll not explain the expression. There's no point in talking about the details of the expression. What we did is we figured out an analytical expression for the spatial correlation for such channel models. All right. That means it is an empirical model, but we have been able to make a mathematical expression which will capture the correlation properties, for the realistic set of parameters which have been got from real measurements and used as a valid model world over. So this is an expression. There are details of it. There's no point in describing it now. We can talk later on about it. So we're talking about the correlation, the spatial correlation, which is a fundamental thing which influences the throughput or the bit error rate for MIMO systems. Okay. So on the left-hand axis, on the y-axis, we have the correlation. Yeah. So I don't know, my mouse is pretty slow. Yeah, this is the correlation axis, and this is the inter-antenna separation. So we typically know that as the antenna separation increases, your correlation decreases, right? So for example, lambda by 2, we say signals are uncorrelated, but this is for a 28 gigahertz channel and for a particular scenario. We see that situation is not what we usually study. Okay, this is for line of sight. So what we find is that the analytical expression which has been derived for the actual models matches pretty closely. That means our analytical model is good enough. Okay. Then we use that to evaluate the spectral efficiency. That is what we finally want to evaluate, right? So there is a methodology for MIMO spectral efficiency evaluation. I think quite a few of you know about it. I'm not going to describe it. So if you look at the capacity, the way you find the capacity, like the sum of log of 1 plus SNR, where SNR is a function of the eigenvalues of the channel, And eigenvalues of the channel are the eigenvalues of HH Hermitian, where H is the matrix of channel coefficient. That is defined with respect to a white, spatially white channel, and you have a spatial correlation matrix on the receiver side as well as spatial correlation matrix on the transmitter side. So these correlation coefficients are what is used in an analytical model. For a simulation, you don't do these things. You simply generate the raw spatial raw channel coefficients H. For an analytical expression, you use these R matrices to get your performance estimation. All right. So this is for a 28 gigahertz situation. How does the spectral efficiency change as you increase the EB by N naught? So this is more or less a result which you can agree with, that as your EB by N naught increases, your spectral efficiency increases, not logarithmically, because we're talking about the MIMO spatial multiplexing. Okay, it's more or less a linear like increase. Now comes the picture. If we use 3GPP models, this is what you get. If you're using some analytical model, which is typically used in papers, you're going to get a spectral efficiency which is much, much different. I won't call it lower, it is different. In this case, it is very, very low. So basically, you're getting a much pessimistic result. You might argue that, well, pessimistic result is good for me because I get to design a more robust system, but no. Nowadays, you have much better mechanisms to make it robust in terms of outer level controls and other stuff. Whereas if we use the analytical result which we have developed from the models, you can get the same results getting the actual thing. In other words, there is a possibility of analytically evaluating the performance of future systems for real propagation conditions, not an imaginated analytical channel model. It is feasible. So that's what I'm trying to show you. And these results are useful, especially if you are going to do some new mechanism. If you're figuring out a new mechanism, you want to quickly do a result, use these models, use the analytical expression, you can get your quick estimate. Essentially stating, go deeper into the channel, you can extract even analytical models and use it for quick and fast development of an evaluation of new methodologies. Right. So that's more or less on the channel front. Now we'll go to the 5G aspect. Although we can see there is GFDM part, I'll not talk about it. I'll simply go on to OTFS soon after talking about the 5G, because it's necessary to know what has happened in 5G before we talk about what is there in OTFS, what is there in 6G. So typical radio access technology, we know about the channel, the element design, receiver design, and so on and so forth. So when we are talking about 5G, we are essentially talking about the element design influenced by the channel. All right. So this is representing an OFDM symbol in time domain. This is in time. All right. And this is the OFDM symbol duration. We have the useful part as I move the pointer. And this is the guard interval. Okay. This portion is the guard interval side. This is well understood for OFDM. Now the guard interval, as you all know, or the cyclic prefix, we have colored it brighter green because the tail part of the useful part, this is the useful part, the tail part is copied to the front, right? And instead of keeping it empty, and it is called the cyclic because it is you get the waveform in a circular manner, and it's a prefix because it's standing before it. Why it is there? Because the channel excess delay, that means the multipaths, they get absorbed into it. At the receiver, you simply discard it. All right. Now look at this. You have to design the guard interval in a manner that the channel excess delay gets absorbed. So again, we are talking about the channel. We are talking about what is the maximum excess delay. You must know it. And that depends upon the spectrum. If you're talking about 6 gigahertz and if you're talking about 60 gigahertz, the channel excess delay is significantly different. Okay. Even in 6 gigahertz, we found that the channel excess delay has a wide fluctuation. That means the channel excess delay can be small. When the channel excess delay is small, you have a lot of wastage over here. Just look at this. This is wastage, and spectrum is so costly, we know it. So we have come up with the proposal of variable guard interval. This is what we did in 2005, way back in 2005. The next thing which I'm going to talk about for OFDM again, you know very well that OFDM, the subcarriers are orthogonal to each other, and that's why you get a very high spectral efficiency. However, when you increase the vehicular speed, now look at this, we are talking about user requirement. You're increasing the vehicular speed. You want to have high speed internet access when you're moving very fast, all right? So what happens? The channel Doppler increases. So there you see that from user requirement, we are going to the channel Doppler. Because the channel Doppler increases, your inter-carrier interference increases, okay? So analytically, you will find that this power of inter-carrier interference is proportional to the Doppler with respect to the subcarrier bandwidth, okay? That's what is dependent upon. What happens pictorially? Your initial signal design was here. I guess the pointer is visible, Dr. Deka? Is it visible over here, the pointer movement?
Yes, sir, the pointer is visible.
Okay, great. So this is the point when things are ideal, but when you have high vehicular speed, Doppler increases, intercarrying. What happens is you were earlier sampling it here, but now because of Doppler, there is a uncertainty in the subcarrier frequency at the receiver. So you sample it at an offset. Thereby, the desired signal power decreases, the blue one, where interference was 0. If you trace back, interference was 0. You find that there is a lot of interference from the neighboring subcarrier. This is the drawback of OFDM, which you all know. It is very much sensitive to intercarrier interference. To avoid this, you design an excellent intercarrier interference cancelling receiver. Complexity goes high. Okay. Another option, why don't we simply change the subcarrier bandwidth, the denominator part of the expression? And what happens? Just if you trace back, the desired signal power increases. It was somewhere here, it got improved, the interference decreases. So there is a possibility to make a better signal strength at high vehicular speeds without increasing the complexity of the receiver. These things we did in 2007. So the proposal was a variable subcarrier bandwidth. Okay. So this is a picture which is there in some of the papers, which essentially is one of the complex ways of making multiple subcarrier bandwidths and variable guard intervals simultaneously together. So when we compare with OFDM, it is the same as OFDM. Only thing is that some of the subcarriers can be made wider, some of the subcarriers can be made narrower. All right. Whereas in OFDM, standard OFDM, it is all fixed. So there's not much change. And this is what you call as numerology in 5G. I'll simply show that to you. How you implement such a system, if you look at it, this is the frequency axis. So how you implement such a system, you will need at least 2 different IFFTs, whether you do it in time or whether you do it in space, depending upon the hardware resources. And you have different number of subcarriers. You activate a set of subcarriers on the first one, which is non-overlapping with the subcarriers on the second one. Thereby you can create a wider subcarrier bandwidth and a narrower subcarrier bandwidth transmitted simultaneously, which is represented in the figure below. Bitstream go to different IFFTs. This is with larger number of subcarriers, medium and smaller number of subcarriers. This produces wider subcarriers. This produces narrower subcarriers. Merge them and send them across. Receiver, send the signals to the 3, process them, and you get your output. Okay, this is this one we actually did around 2004, and yeah, it's a granted patent, and it was published in multiple places. So if you go to 5G specifications, you will find that it provides the opportunity for the UEs to have different channel bandwidth. Now, why is it so? I've already explained that it supports a higher mobility condition. Okay. So different subcarrier spacing is supported. If you look at this particular column, 15, 30, 60. Then it also says multiple numerologies can be multiplexed together. Numerology X, numerology Y. What is numerology? I'll explain soon. So go back, and this one, it is 2 numerologies placed next to each other. Okay? If you see here, 2 different numerologies placed next to each other, right? So that's what is actually being used in the 5G systems. So let's go further down and see the advantage of what it produces. So as you increase your mobility, that was a requirement, right? As you go from 2G, 3G, 4G and 5G, your mobility support increases from 250 kilometers per hour to 350 kilometers per hour, from 350 to 500. Okay. And on this axis, we have plotted the throughput. So when you have 2048 number of subcarriers, that means the subcarrier bandwidth is narrow. We find that the throughput is very good for low mobility, but as your mobility increases, your throughput decreases. What is the reason? Inter-carrier interference increases, desired signal power decreases, interference increases. Whereas if you make the subcarrier bandwidth a little bit wider, you find at low mobility, spectral efficiency is less, but at higher mobility, spectral efficiency is higher. If you keep on doing it, when you go for 512 subcarriers, your subcarrier bandwidth is now much wider. So you have decreased the throughput for low mobility conditions, but you have enhanced the throughput for high mobility conditions. Go ahead doing it, keep increasing the subcarrier bandwidth. Lower number of subcarrier means higher subcarrier bandwidth, right? You find that it's much better at high mobility, but poorer in low mobility. So simple, straightforward solution, go for a variable subcarrier bandwidth. As your mobility changes, allow this FFT size to change. And that is what numerology is all about. Okay, let's see this. So this is from the SWAM lecture, which I have on evolution of air interface towards 5G, where if we focus here, this mu is the numerology parameter. Okay. And this is the set of number of slots and so on and so forth. We don't talk about this. We'll rather focus here, which is the frequency axis and the time axis. Okay. If we look at OFDM here, this is the cyclic prefix part, the 4.7 microsecond. This is the useful OFDM symbol duration part. Okay. This is for mu equals to 0. That means 15 kilohertz bandwidth case. Okay. So it provides you the option to choose the subcarrier bandwidth or the mu parameter. If you change the mu parameter from 0 to 3, I've changed from 0 to 3 over here. Let's see what happens on this front. 0, you have narrower subcarrier bandwidth and you have wider symbol duration. Look at this, the symbol duration is 66.66, 4.7 microsecond cyclic prefix, narrower subcarrier bandwidth. Here, your symbol duration decreases. Obviously, your subcarrier bandwidth increases. You reduce the cyclic prefix. So that is what 5G frame is all about, to support higher mobility conditions, including phase noise also resilience. If you go to higher frequency bands, phase noise is very strong over there. Phase noise essentially means that instead of generating a single carrier, a central tone, you generate a spectrum, a band of frequencies, which causes inter-carrier interference. So that's how 5G got designed. All right. I'll skip this stuff on GFDM and let's go to OTFS now. Now we are more or less ready. Okay. So if we look at the 5G requirements from 4G, the mobility support was increased from 350 kilometers per hour to 500, 3 times spectral efficiency increase, larger or higher user experience data rate, higher peak data rate, more traffic capacity, and so on and so forth. Several of these requirements you can actually map to SNR enhancement from a physical layer engineer's perspective. If I improve the SNR, I am increasing the spectral efficiency. I am improving the energy efficiency. We are increasing the user data rate, peak data rate, reliability. All these things are connected to improvement in SNR, right? So we can again think of, can we design a link which is a better SNR, and then many of the requirements get satisfied in one go. So what is it with OFDM? Why not OFDM? OFDM was still used in 5G. So the slides which I skipped tells you about the different other options compared to OFDM which had come up. But still OFDM was selected simply because of its low complexity. But let us look at some of the other aspects of OFDM. OFDM is definitely multipath resilient. That's why it's there in 4G. That's why it's still there in 5G. But it's suitable for linear time invariant channel. But still it is made available for higher speeds, higher mobility because of changing the subcarrier bandwidth. But the wireless channel is fundamentally linearly time variant, and this causes inter-carrier interference, right, which arises due to Doppler and carrier frequency offset and phase noise. As you increase the carrier frequency, these things keep increasing in the same velocity, in the same mobility condition, right? So that means that if, as I'm going to higher and higher frequency bands, as I'm increasing the mobility, our Doppler conditions are increasing, phase noise is increasing, carrier offset is increasing, therefore intercarrier is increasing, intercarrier interference. The channel is appearing as more time variant, and hence we see a limitation of OFDM coming into play. What can be done? OTFS was a solution which was proposed, and let's look at a few of these. So these basically describe some of the scenarios where which are upcoming. It's already there in some places. It's almost happening all around, which says that there's a lot of vehicular traffic, a lot of Doppler, high-speed railways, hilly terrains, which is a very adverse situation. You want to provide high-speed connectivity under these conditions. You had connectivity. Nobody's saying you didn't have. You had connectivity, but you want to provide high-speed connectivity under these conditions. That means you are increasing the challenge. It's like you're increasing the bar. It's almost like if you can imagine the pole vault, you are or the high jump, you're simply increasing the bar height, and you want to cross a higher and higher length. So things were there, but you're simply increasing the challenge. So let's look at again back to the channel, because without the channel you can't design anything. You need to understand what's happening, and then only you can get a clue of how to get into it. So when the signal propagates from the transmitter to the receiver, let's say as in this picture, we have talked about there is line of sight, there is reflected path. This reflection can happen from static environment, from distant environment, from different landforms, from mobile environments, as well as from different kinds of mobile environments. Okay, so basically when these things happen, you can get a Doppler depending upon the shift in frequency, and you can get a delay depending upon the path length that is available. So you can map these to a delay and Doppler axis, where this building, for instance, it represents a very low Doppler situation and a certain delay depending upon the path length. Okay. Similarly, the tree, which is at a higher delay and maybe some higher Doppler depending on the angle of arrival if the mobile is moving slightly. The hill would be far away, right? The delay is high. The Doppler again dependent upon the angle, right? If it is at 90 degrees, there is no Doppler. If it is at straight angle, the Doppler is maximum. This vehicle, car, represents the delay is not much. That means that the path length difference is not much, but it's moving at a high speed. So there is a higher Doppler that the signal gets mapped to. The drone here represents that the path length is pretty large, as well as delay is also pretty large. That's how you map the physical channel into the delay Doppler axis, just for the sake of imagination, that how do these physical objects map on a delay Doppler axis. I would rather talk about this. So basically we are used to seeing the channel in the time frequency domain, right? So in the time frequency domain, this is the time axis, this is the frequency axis, this is the channel gain. The channel is variable in the time domain as well as in the frequency domain. So we have a time selective as well as a frequency selective channel gain, which is visible to the receiver. So the signal is actually going through such a channel, it is going through all kinds of distortions. Whereas these channels are specified in the models, what I had told you earlier, in terms of the delay and Doppler axis. So this is for a rural region where you find that at almost no delay, that means zero excess delay, you have a line of sight path, because excess delay starts from the first arrival of rays, and there's a Jake spectrum. Okay, maximum excess delay stretches up to 0.6 microseconds. So that is how it is specified. Those process which I had described earlier generates these channel coefficient. This is still for a CISO. I'm not yet talking about mine. For a bad urban, they call it bad. I don't know. They should have called it urban, leaving out the word bad. But for some reason they call it bad because the delay is very large. It's 8 microsecond compared to 6.6 microsecond. There is Jake spectrum and there is double-sided Gauss spectrum. So that means we are used to specifying the system, or the channel is considered as a system, in delay Doppler axis. However, we are used to using the channel in time frequency domain, or visualize in time frequency domain, or we experience it in time frequency domain when you're sending the signal. And when you do simulations, you also experience it, or you also do it in the time frequency domain. But we must remember they're originally specified in the delay Doppler domain. Just to tell you, we are not talking of something new when we talk of OTFS. Look at a hilly terrain. Your delay, excess delay goes to 20 microsecond. I don't know why did they not call it bad, but let it be urban. I don't know if there is something called good urban, but consider that rural 0.6 microsecond delay, urban 8 microsecond, hilly terrain 20 microsecond. The reason is straightforward. Hills are far apart. In urban, buildings are close by. In rural, there are hardly any buildings around. It's more or less flat architecture of the layout. And nearby the hills, there are jakes. Far away from the hills, you get signals coming from specific directions. Hills are not all around equally. You get double-sided gauss. So you're talking about the Doppler spectrum, power spectral density, and the delay. Okay. Now, so we are used to this time frequency representation, whereas you have the delay Doppler representation. Okay, delay and Doppler axis, you provide certain values for the channel. The relationship between the Doppler and time is through inverse Fourier transform. Okay, the relationship between delay and frequency is through Fourier transform. This is straightforward. We have all designed filters, filter impulse response. We have the delay axis. If you take the Fourier transform of the filter impulse response, you get the filter transfer function. The filter transfer function is specified in the frequency domain. You go via the Fourier relationship. When you go from time domain to Doppler domain, right, you take a Fourier transform of the autocorrelation function. That means going from time domain or excess time lag domain to Doppler domain. Right? So if you go from Doppler domain, so if you're given the power spectral density, take an inverse Fourier transform, you know autocorrelation function. So that's how these Doppler and time domains are related through Fourier relationships. Okay. So this is the intuitive background that we can have on delay Doppler and time frequency relationships. You can replace the system with signals in a similar manner. What I'm trying to say, this is the most crucial part of OTFS, and I'm not representing in a mathematical framework, I'm representing on an intuitive understanding scale, is that we are talking about channel in time domain, time frequency domain. You are used to OFDM in time frequency domain, right? But the channel is originally specified in delay Doppler domain. So we can also imagine the signal to be specified in delay Doppler domain, or we can translate the signal to delay Doppler domain, or we can specify the signal in delay Doppler domain and we can take the signal in time frequency domain following this Fourier relationships, right? So that means instead of specifying signal in the time frequency domain, we can now specify signals in the delay Doppler domain, and using this double Fourier relationship, we can translate the signal into time frequency domain. Why would you do it if you ask the question? The reason is this: the delay Doppler representation is much sparse compared to the time frequency representation. For these representations, your time frequency representation is very dense. That means you have a lesser density in the delay Doppler domain. Okay, that's the advantage. So when you take the channel in delay Doppler domain, you get a sparse representation. That means if I specify the signal in delay Doppler domain at the transmitter, at the receiver, I will process the signal in the delay Doppler domain. The advantage I will get, channel coefficients will get in the delay Doppler. So that was the original motivation for OTFS, okay, that we do things in the delay Doppler domain. But we'll show you that end of the day we can do in time domain or in delay Doppler domain. It's really not so crucial. It depends upon the kind of signal structure that you're handling. But this is the original motivation, that you get it in the delay Doppler domain. There is also another motivation, that the delay Doppler domain, the channel variability is lesser compared to in the time frequency domain, because it's more or less average domain, you can say. So that way this is also well accepted, that the delay Doppler domain channel coefficients do not change so fast with time, because from Doppler we are going to time, right? So those time variations are actually captured in the power spectral density. So with these advantages, these motivates the design of OTFS signal in the delay Doppler domain, right? Okay, let me skip these. These are for explanations. All right. So let's look at what is the problem with time frequency domain. The time frequency domain, the issue is if you are generating a pulse in time domain, all right, it spreads across in the frequency domain. An impulse spreads in frequency, it's flat across the frequency. If you generate an impulse in the frequency domain, that means e to the power of j2 pi fct or something like that, it's a continuous waveform in time domain. That means you cannot localize in time or frequency. If you localize in time, sorry, and in frequency. If you localize in time, your frequency gets stretched. If you localize in frequency, your time gets stretched. So there is a time frequency relationship through the Heisenberg uncertainty relationship, through which it is bound. You cannot reduce the uncertainty of the pulse below a certain dimension. And you'd like to ensure that your pulse is as constrained as possible, so that it doesn't spread out in time and frequency domain. Your interference is reduced and you get a better throughput, better reliability. So what is done in OTFS is signals are placed in the delay Doppler domain, and then using those FFT or Fourier transform and inverse Fourier transform, from delay domain through a Fourier transform, you go to frequency domain. From Doppler domain through inverse Fourier transform, you go to time domain. Again, you take advantage of the FFTs which are there in OFDM. So we have placed the constellation symbols here through these relationships, which you call as inverse symplectic Fourier transform. You go to the time frequency domain. Okay. So now you have your processed symbols over here. So here we take a short break and we can forget about the discussion on this part. Okay. We are used to OFDM in the frequency and time axis. For OFDM, you place the constellation here where my cursor is now. All right. And you take an inverse Fourier transform and you get your OFDM time domain signal. You take the inverse Fourier transform along the frequency axis, you get your OFDM signal. So if I do not do anything here, I simply start off with my constellation points here, I have my OFDM system. All right, this is well known. What we do over here, we rather place the constellation points over here from QAM. You do this Fourier and inverse Fourier, go to time frequency. Now, if you follow what you did for OFDM, you get your time domain signal. That means you take your IFFT, you get your time domain signal. So essentially, you have this extra step, and rest of it as OFDM, you get OTFS signal. That's what is the end story, right? So that means you can also think of that we are doing a two-dimensional spreading on the constellation before we do OFDM. That is also another way of viewing it. See over here, it is a 15 kilohertz spacing, just like the one used in 3GPP, and symbol duration is 66.66 microsecond, corresponding to 15 kilohertz bandwidth. So you can think of a two-dimensional spreading on top of OFDM. There was one-dimensional spreading already available in 4G. The SCFDMA that is used in uplink is a DFT spread OFDM. Here you have a two-dimensional spread OFDM. That's the difference. You had single carrier FDMA, which is the entire length being spread out. Here you have a two-dimension. That's the difference. Rest of it is as in OFDM. Okay. So yeah, I'll skip these things also for essence of time. Right. So for OFDM, we know that there is bit stream over here, serial to parallel. You do QM mapping, you do subcarrier mapping, you do IDFT, parallel to serial, and CP. So if we follow the mathematics of or the arithmetic or algebra of OFDM, you will find that we can actually implement OTFS simply by introducing an interleaver. I have skipped the maths because of time issues, but if you go through the algebra of OTFS, the difference between OFDM and OTFS is simply an interleaver if we place over here, and you generate your OTFS signal. All right, but you are doing it in delay Doppler domain. So why it happens? If we trace back in very brief, you are doing an IFFT along this axis, right? That is what you're doing, the IFFT. These symbols were generated because you did an FFT from delay to frequency. So this FFT and this IFFT cancels out each other. You're left with a simple IFFT, right? But there is interleaving that happens. So if we go to OFDM, you have the IFFT already in place, but because of the two-stage process, an interleaver gets into play. So this thing may take a little bit of time to go through the algebra. So if you go through it, it will be very, very clear. The receiver part, OFDM, you do synchronization, remove cyclic prefix, serial to parallel, do DFT, get the frequency domain equalization, and rest of the process. For OTFS, you add one extra block over here. That is the two-dimensional Fourier transform, symplectic Fourier transform, fast Fourier transform. And then you do the delay Doppler domain equalization. That means there's not a big change in the flow of OFDM. You can also do it in time domain. It is also feasible. Now you can also do OFDM in time domain also. It is not a problem. So essentially trying to tell you that it is not very, very different from OFDM. It's a next version of OFDM. You can also think of it in that manner. Okay. So what is the advantage with all of these things? What we find is that whereas a normal OFDM in a highly time varying situation, this is a very, very highly time varying situation, OFDM has very poor performance. Whereas if you look at the subcarrier bandwidth variation with OFDM, that is the 5G systems, you get a much improved system. And if you do OTFS, you get an even improved performance on top of it, right? You get a significant nearly 5 dB performance improvement. And I'm talking about coded bit error rate, all right, with error correction code. That means you significantly improve the performance of OTFS, of OFDM. That means you're improving the SNR. If you improve the SNR, you can apply it in multiple dimensions. You can read it as I have improved the reliability. You can read it as I have improved energy efficiency. You can read it as I have improved the throughput or whatever, right? So this is what OTFS gives you in a highly time varying channel. So where OFDM falls short, that we can clearly see. Okay, so that gain is because of an interleaving gain. So again, we have done a detailed analysis. It's not feasible right now to explain all the details, but the main point is that this gain in OTFS fundamentally comes from the interleaving gain which we have described. So basically the interleaving property of OTFS ultimately gives you a gain over OFDM, because in any variable situation, if you basically it's a diversity benefit that it's getting because it's doing a time domain interleaving of the things. Okay. There is another interesting result which I would like to share with you, that yeah, so we had also done some pulse shaping on OTFS. Okay, what's the advantage of this pulse shaping? What we find is that the out of band radiation, which is this is the frequency axis, this is the power. So out of band radiation for OFDM is pretty high. We all know this because of the sync pulse. But if you do a pulse shaping which is feasible for OTFS, we find that the out of band radiation gets significantly reduced without destroying any performance of OTFS, all right, without making any changes. In terms of complexity, the direct OTFS receiver is very, very complex, whereas we have been able to implement a low complexity receiver over here. That means you could reduce the complexity of OTFS. And with this pre-coding thing, OTFS is better than OFDM. That means the gain is maintained. So although you're doing the pulse shaping, you're actually not destroying anything. Further, the pulse shaping also showed us that the PAPR is also reduced. So that means the power amplifier, stress on power amplifier is also reduced. So we found so many advantages with this pulse shaping. So together with OTFS, it makes a very good system, improved BER, improved PAPR, improved out of band radiation, and improved out of band. Yeah, so I mean, so all these advantages, they all come together, right? So these are all summarized in this particular slide, the different advantages over OFDM, right? We have also developed a successive interference cancellation receiver for OTFS. Let's see what does it do. So there is a message passing receiver which has been established earlier, not from our activity, from earlier other groups, and we find that the message passing algorithm is very good for uncoded systems, and we tried to put it together with coded systems. We find that for certain levels of error probability, the message passing receiver performs good. Whereas when we go to higher stringent requirements, we find that the linear receiver along with the SIC, that means MMSE followed by SIC, which we are taking advantage of LDPC codes, it gives us a much better performance. Okay. Yeah, sorry, the SIC is over here. SIC is the new one, which is even better than that. So if you go to 64 QAM, we find that the SIC provides you much better performance. Of course, we are taking advantage of error correction codes. So this is also with error correction code. This is also with error correction code. So it has the possibility to extract diversity further beyond what OTFS itself extracts. OFDM, you cannot do this thing. You cannot simply extract this additional diversity. Okay, this is a more detailed result. We would also like to skip that. Right. So the last bit which would like to share with you is the NOMA, the multiple access, because we talked about signal design and multiple access also. So this is the last bit of multiple access. Maybe some of you are aware about NOMA, non-orthogonal multiple access. So there we are sharing the radio resource unit of power. Okay. So here we are talking about NOMA with OTFS. Okay. Yeah. So if you look at OMA, that means orthogonal multiple access, you share the frequency access or the frequency resource between two users in an orthogonal manner. These band of frequencies are used for user 1, this band for user 2. If you think of orthogonal multiple access, this is what is depicted here. The frequencies are given to one user. But if you use for non-orthogonal access, the same frequency is used for multiple users. Okay, that's the basic. So there is a non-orthogonality. There is an interference which is consciously introduced into the transmission. So now what we have over here is we have two different users whose signals are now overlapped, user 1 and user 2. So one of the users sees interference, user 2 sees interference, and user 1 can actually cancel the interference through the use of SIC receiver, and hence it can get a certain performance. So we'll see how this applies to OTFS and what kind of performance benefit it gets. So OTFS itself is a transmission technology. Now if you apply an access technology on top of it, together, how do they perform? Okay. So if you look at OMA, OFDM OMA, I mean orthogonal multiple access, you get a certain mean throughput. Okay. If you go for the optimal non-orthogonal multiple access, or if you go for the optimal mechanism, you get a much improved spectral efficiency. If you use a particular realization of NOMA, which we had done over here, you can get very close to it. So effectively telling you that NOMA is better than OMA. That means non-orthogonal multiple access is better than orthogonal multiple access, clearly depicting those results. Okay. If we now talk about OTFS, what we found from link level performance is that for OTFS, specific to OTFS, we have analyzed two different cases: OMA, orthogonal multiple access with OTFS, and non-orthogonal multiple access with OTFS. We found that NOMA OTFS, from link level performance, we have done the bit error rate and we have done the good put analysis, 40% better than OMA. And when we compare NOMA OTFS versus NOMA OFDM, now we are comparing the cross transmission technologies, we find that the gain of NOMA OTFS is around 20-25% again over here over NOMA OFDM. These are all from link level performance. Okay, that means the actual bits being generated, they are sent through the channel. You have all these interference. You decode the bits to MMS equalizer through the LDPC decoder, and then cancel the interference. Go through iterations, extract the user information, cancel that interference, and again do it. Right. So that way we have generated these results, a whole set of parameters. This is the system level view. I'll come back to the system level view. Okay. On a link level performance, so we have done all of these things based on which we are actually telling you that the link level performance NOMA OTFS is better than OMA OTFS, and NOMA OTFS is again better than NOMA OFDM. However, if we go to the system level performance, so when we take system level, that means we are not doing any link analysis. We are assuming the link to be perfectly okay, and we are doing a spectral efficiency. That means we are using the Shannon capacity expression and applying the SINR that has been received. So there we find that there we actually conclude that the mean throughput of OFDM is higher than OTFS, whereas the outage throughput of OTFS is higher than OFDM. So this is a spectral efficiency analysis, but the actual implementation of the receiver tells us that OTFS is better with combination of NOMA. So we have two different things. This essentially tells us that if you have the best possible link, then you can achieve this, whereas the link result tells you with the given link state of the art today, your NOMA OTFS is the best performance in terms of link. Right? Yeah. So this is again the same results which has been shown. So summary, why OTFS should be adopted? It is better resilience to the channel. It is better reliability, better PAPR, better out of band. I have not shown one result which basically shows that it is resilient to channel estimation. You can have good receivers already developed, multiple access, it works with NOMA, complexity, comparable to OFDM, flexibility, they can work hand in hand, you can have the same signal flow, SDR, it's feasible. What are the activities that are necessary to adopt OTFS? There is a lot of work to be done on preamble and pilot design, coexistence analysis with OFDM, identification of compatible MIMO modes, coexistence, it's repeated, full duplex performance, windowing, pulse shaping. These are some of the activities that can be done for OTFS, right? Yeah, so that's all from my end. I think I have overshot the time.
Yeah, thank you, Professor, for such a nice talk. You have covered almost everything about 5G and for 6G technologies. There are a couple of questions, a lot of questions in the chat box. So let me go to the first question from Rahul. It's at
so you can
11:30.
Maybe that's good.
11:34 from Rahul Hindustani. So what is the advantage of cell-less architecture? 1141 he has posted this question.
Okay, I mean advantage in the sense seamless coverage. Okay, if you look at seamless coverage in the sense that if you have cell boundaries, there is this handover. See, I mean, it's basically an evolution. These are certain terminologies which are becoming hot and popular, but otherwise you would always have access points. All right. So basically what it tells you is that there is no fixed boundary for a cell. Users can move across, and cells can provide a dynamic coverage to a larger region. Handover is easier. So the call drops or the sustainability of throughputs, they become better with a cell-less architecture. You have more flexibility in providing services. So that's basically what cell-less gives you.
Yes, thank you. The next question is from Pramod Kumar. So the question is how we are allocating channels in various technology and how we'll do automatic channel classification.
It's a very, very wide question. A bit specific would help. So what channel allocation? Because you're talking about various technologies, which means 2G, 3G, 4G, and then are you talking about spectrum allocation or what is basically technology? It needs to be very, very clearly specified. So if you talk of 2G, 3G, 4G, there is a lot of things that happens. There is a World Congress which deals with spectrum. Then there is ITU, and finally the Wireless Planning Commission of India. They take the calls. I think people are very much aware of something called the FCC, where this channel allocation is more or less specified. There's an agreement all over the world where they identify spectrum bands to be allocated for different services. Once that is done, then within that band, how much bandwidth you allocate, that actually is a very, very deep technical work. If you go to ITU or 3GPP, you'll find the entire procedure described, which actually estimates the channel bandwidth required for certain service to be provided. For example, if you estimate that certain exabytes of data are to be delivered, or a certain terabytes of data are to be delivered in a certain geographic region, you can more or less estimate the amount of bandwidth that is required, given an understanding of the technology. So given that, then there's a lot of interaction with the government and other agencies, which are made to understand that, look, this much of bandwidth is necessary to support a particular technology. Then you find out, okay, I need to allocate 500 megahertz or maybe 1 gigahertz. Then you go out looking for that 1 gigahertz or 500 megahertz of spectrum. So once you find, well, this is a feasible band where interference is less with respect to other technologies, existing things like satellite communication or defense communication, or you look into the future a little bit, that in future, if I need extra bandwidth, can I expand it? So using them, actually, you come to a conclusion and you allocate spectrum to. So basically, if you talk in terms of spectrum, that makes more sense. You allocate spectrum to the different technologies.
Yes, thank you, Professor Das. So next question is from Vijay Selvan. So the question is, what is the variable K in Russian? What's the physical meaning?
Okay. So this is a straightforward question. So when we talk about the Rician K factor, it talks about the line of sight power with respect to non-line of sight power, right? So one must clearly understand that this is my antenna, so I'm getting a line of sight signal. I'm getting a line of sight signal as well as I'm getting signals from all over, right? So if this is my phone, let's say, okay, it's getting a line of sight signal as well as signals from all over. Now, if it has certain directivity, or let's say if I move it here, if I place it like this, if I place it in this manner, right? The antennas are, if they're placed here, so if I say that antennas are placed here, if I turn my phone like this, and the signals were supposed to come from this direction, right? So look at this, the line of sight power has changed, right? So that means although we are providing a single value in the channel, that's an average value, but in reality, I'm holding my phone in this manner, I'm opening it, I'm seeing it like this. So that single line of sight, that single vision K factor is only an average or which matches to one scenario. So whereas if I look at all the variations, I know that the data rate can be increased or decreased, or certain other possibilities exist, right? So that's why they are talking about this intelligent reflecting surfaces. So your walls around or other places you put reflectors which you can control, so that you maintain a line of sight signal arriving. So even if I'm holding it like this, that would get reflected and come over here. So that's what it says essentially, that a single value means a particular case, which is given in terms of average. But in reality, you have this entire variation happening.
Yes, thank you. There is one similar question to that from Samarandranath Sur. How to model such channel considering the variation of K?
Okay, that's actually, you know, very simple. So if you look into those channel models, okay, and if you go through that process, and then you actually measure or you calculate the Rician K factor based on the line of sight and non-line of sight path, what you will realize that you are actually getting different values of K. Basically, we got it from them only, right? So if you look at some simulation results, I have taken a Rician K parameter of 10, I have taken a Rician K parameter of 20, right? But if you go through these channel models, they will give you the details of cluster position, the angles, the delay arrival or azimuth spectrum. When you do them, you generate the channel coefficients in the multipath. When you do it, you get the first cluster as the line of sight, or the first ray as line of sight. You take that as the line of sight power, and rest of them as non-line of sight power. The moment you do that expression, you do it for all possible channel realizations, you're going to get the entire range of K values.
Yes, thank you. There is one question from Vijay Selvan. The question is, please mention some methods how clustering of signal is achieved in analytical. So this seems to be incomplete, but the question is about how clustering is done for signal.
Yeah. So here probably, if I understand the question, it is with respect to the spatial correlation thing. So the whole thing goes like this. Let me go to this presentation. It's easier. Is my screen visible? Is my screen visible now?
Yes, visible.
Okay. Can you read out the question once again?
The question is, please mention some methods how clustering of signals is achieved.
Okay, I got it. So basically, if we look into this particular slide, okay, yeah. So you generate your signals using this procedure. End of the day, you generate channel coefficient. Okay. So we remember this. We go ahead and we look at this expression. So if you look at H, okay, so through that model, you don't do the right hand side part. You do not do the right hand side part. Please remember, right hand side part is the analytical part, but left hand side is the channel matrix. So that model gives you this channel coefficients. If you do expectation of H Hermitian, you're going to get the spatial correlation, right? So those spatial correlation matrices is what is your data set. From those data set, we match with the analytical correlation. So basically, what we are saying is generate the channel coefficients as per the empirical model, and then you find the correlations. Whatever correlations you're going to get through that, you're going to get the same correlations if we use the analytical expression that we have arrived at. So this analytical expression actually takes into account this entire channel generation procedure. So the clustering is as per this channel coefficient generation procedure. We don't do anything different.
Yes, thank you. So next question is from Susmita. We have to generate the channel parameters individually for each antenna in MIMO-case.
Yes. Each link. So if you have if you have a 2x4, you have 8 links. So 8 coefficients for every time instant.
Yes, thank you. The next question is from Vijay Selvan. So what are the parameters we can get from channel sounder experiment?
Okay, so this is a very easy question. So I will make the answer also very easy. Please read the paper which is there and the 3GPP document. It's given in a very detailed manner. So it doesn't make sense for me to answer them. Just a few set of parameters I can show as of now. Okay. Yeah. So these are the few set of parameters on the left hand side. Can you see the parameters here?
Yes.
And my mouse is kind of moving here. Is the mouse visible?
It's visible. Mouse cursor is also visible.
Yeah. So this is the set of parameters. If you look into the paper, which is highlighted here, you see that paper over here. Just do a 3GPP 3D MIMO channel model, and you're going to get the entire details. So there it actually mentions the 3GPP channel model itself. So you better go there. Okay. So that is the place. You better go to the 3GPP channel model document. Okay, which basically specifies this set of channel model parameters. Just allow me a second. Hello? Yeah, hello.
Yes. Yes, so there is one more question from Susmita. Shall we use JAX model for different delay and Doppler to represent delay Doppler channel model?
Yes, JAX is definitely one. JAX is definitely one. Yeah.
Yeah, next question is from Vijay Selvan. So in what way complexity is compared?
In terms of number of multiplications and additions.
Yes, thank you. So let's move to the next question from Dr. Savita Bhosale. So the question is, which diversity technique is suitable for time varying channel?
For time varying channel, I really have not done that. So what kind of diversity? What I talked over here is basically time domain diversity here, right? So because OTFS we're talking about interleaving. So in this context, OTFS is doing time domain interleaving through which it is getting a time domain diversity. So I would restrict my discussion as of now to this.
Yes, thank you. The next question from Rahul. He's asking for future research direction for OTFS use in IRS, like IRS plus OTFS.
IRS is intelligent reflecting surfaces.
Yes.
Okay, I would submit that probably that needs to be identified. I mean, that needs to be identified. IRS people are working on, and OTFS as also people are working on. So you basically can create your own literature and you can find it. So that probably would be interesting to get.
Yes. So the next question is from Sivasan Mugavali. The question is, could you explain how high data rate is achieved in 5G using sub-6 GHz band for mobile to base station communication?
So that's what I have actually explained during my presentation, that through the ICI, I mean, because you have increased the subcarrier bandwidth, your intercarrier interference is decreased, your SINR has increased, and therefore your throughput increases. So when your interference decreases, your signal to interference ratio increases. The moment signal to interference ratio increases, the throughput increases. That's what basically I showed in this particular slide. Let me again show the slide. So yeah, so this is where I explained the details, and this is where I actually showed that the throughput increases. And then I showed that whatever you see in 5G in these two slides, if we shift between these two slides, whatever you see here is basically what I had explained over here and here. So if you can follow that maybe, or maybe the few papers that are there, because it's not a very short thing. So in summary, increase the subcarrier bandwidth, and that's it.
Yes, thank you. The next question is from Muhammad Afsar Ali. So the question is, shall we use OTFS for underwater acoustic communication?
See, I mean, wherever you have issue of high intercarrier interference, right, and you have a time variability in the channel, because OTFS is fundamentally for time variability. So where the channel is time variant, there you just put it. So I myself have not worked much on underwater channel. So if you find that the channel is highly time varying, it suits, roughly it suits, but then you need to see many other parameters as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you. There are some, okay, thank you messages. And then from Abhishek Gaur, I have a question that in 5G, if I am going for convergence with LTE Advanced, then for the wired part, which one would be the best, whether it is 10 GPON or GPON only, which standards would be followed in IEEE 802.3AB or ITU-T standard?
No clue. I have to consult my colleague who is an expert on GPON or passive optical networks.
Sure. Yeah, so I think there are thank you messages. Yes. So thanks a lot, Professor Das. So I have one, small query. Like, yes. So you explained it. OTFS is like kind of interleaved. WebDM, where you basically from delay Doppler to we directly move to the time domain instead of going through the time frequency domain that we usually offer.
Yeah, that's true. In a sense, you can actually.
Yes. So basically, the interleaver is like that. The way we are collecting the data from, the time frequency domain, or like what kind of interleaving pattern is it? It's an interesting point that you have discussed. If it is like simply interleaved version of WebDM.
Yeah.
And just because of web interleaver only we are getting such a good benefit, then it's an interesting point.
Yeah, so actually there is one NCC paper, which is this National Conference on Communications in India, where actually we have shown this, and there is also another paper also where we have shown this. Maybe the details are there, but I'll briefly tell you what's happening here. So let's look at this. So this diagram basically tells you that is my screen visible to you, or
yes, I have visible. Yeah.
So if I focus here, can you see my mouse?
Yes, mouse cursor is there.
Okay, is it moving in a rectangle kind of?
Yes, moving. Yes.
If you see this, okay, and forget this part. So frequency time, you do IFFT and you get OFDM. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what we do in OTFS is we place constellations here. We do FFT on this, IFFT on this, and then we follow the OFDM procedure. Okay. Now see what's happening. This FFT, this direction from delay to frequency, you're doing an FFT, right? Are you following my mouse?
Yes, I'm following. Yeah.
And then from here, you're doing an IFFT, right? You follow this path. So this FFT mathematically gets cancelled with this IFFT.
Correct. Okay? Yes.
Then you're left with only this IFFT. All right.
Yes.
So let's forget
Doppler to time. Only Doppler to time is required.
Let's forget this IFFT. Then let's forget this FFT, this IFFT. Let us forget that because that is cancelled. So we're left with FFT. Okay. Is it fine?
Yes. Yes. So it's fine.
So sorry. I'm making a mistake. This FFT and this IFFT gets cancelled. So I am left with only this IFFT. I'm not left with anything else. Doppler to time IFFT I'm left with. Okay. So this is the Doppler axis.
Yes.
There you're doing an IFFT and you're placing them in time. I'm doing the IFFT here along this. I'm doing the IFFT along this and I'm placing them in time. Follow?
Yes.
So I'm doing this IFFT, placing here. I'm doing this IFFT, I'm placing here. I'm doing this IFFT, I'm placing here, right? And then I'm placing it row wise, but reading it column wise. Do you see that? Because I will read off like this. That I will do. I will not stop that. So basically, if I think that this FFT and this IFFT mathematically they are cancelled, but this shifting of these beads in the time domain, they remain. So basically your IFFT, you are placed like this. And you're reading off these things. That means you place them row wise, reading off column wise. That is the interleaving phenomena that is happening.
Okay, that is, I mean, your row column interleaver essentially.
Yeah. Essentially, it's a row column interleaver. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Now it is clear. Yeah.
To be convinced, you need to go through the algebra a little bit, and then you find
yes,
it.
if you can share the slide, so I would love to go through this derivations where it can be shown as like.
Yeah, I can share the
Yeah.
slides, but probably more important is if you look into the NCC paper that we have. It's a very short paper, but there actually we describe in details where we identify the exact gain that OTFS has. In fact, to be very honest, people claim about 13 dB, which we have also shown. OTFS has 13 dB gain and 5 dB with error correction ports. But finally, if you boil down, you can actually show that the net gain is actually 2 dB. Fundamentally, it's a 2 dB gain that we can show. Okay, so those claims are like for advertisement and kind of things, but fundamentally it's a 2 dB gain. But there are certain other advantages, like if we go to this SIC architecture, SIC architecture gives you a lot of gain. So it's beyond that 2 dB. So if you follow that NCC work, those details are there. I can send you. I can definitely send you.
Yes. So is it NCC 2020 or 21?
Yes. No, 2020. This one.
2020. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll check it out.
Yeah, and then this one is also, this also contains. So there actually we show the this picture. There actually we show that you can actually have this one, this time domain equalization, which is valid for both OFDM as well as OTFS. Okay, so basically OFDM, you simply cover up this part. I mean, if you remove this part, that means if I create a new slide, if I simply remove this, then you have OFDM, and if you get it back, when you get it back, you have OTFS. You understand?
Yes.
So this is what we describe in the other one, that it gels very well with the signal flow.
Okay. I mean, as a pre-coded OFDM kind of thing.
Yeah. You can actually see it like that. So basically, if you go into the algebra of it, you find so many simplicities that exist. So those are there. I mean, that is described in this paper and in this NCC paper. These two things actually, I like it because, you know, it's removed the complexity of OTFS, such juggernaut set of things, and made it very, very simple. That, well, I don't see it very different. I just see it as interleaver, and it's so simple, right? I mean, earlier you're looking at it as a big thing. Just bring an interleaver, you get a beautiful performance.
Yes. I mean, since one IFT and IFFT, they're getting cancelled out. So why do we have to do unnecessary operations? So just to make it compatible with OFDM. So I mean, another question, like you have, worked on various OFDM versions like ZFDM and other versions of OFDM. So do you see like that OTFS is the best out of this all OFDM versions?
As of now, yes, but I'll always keep a margin because I haven't really done that thorough comparison, and maybe some aspects are better in others. But as of now, it looks OTFS is pretty good. It's pretty good. So a hair splitting analysis has not been done, but it has overall characteristics which has a lot of promise.
Yes, and then like the complexity wise, if you look at this, the complexity of OTFS receiver, that is. Significantly higher than that of OFDM. So
true, very true. But we have been able to. I mean, Shashank, who is working here, he actually has been mainly working on this stuff initially. So this low complexity receiver reduces the complexity significantly, right? And along with that, if I use iterative error correction decoding, it gives a beautiful performance. I mean. It's really good performance when you combine them. You have an extra performance, so you can actually reduce the performance. Complexity. Yes. This MP is very, very complex, so you can split it up.
Yeah, messaging is complex, very complex. Yes, I mean if your number of paths increases, it's.
So that's why you have an MMSE equalizer, and then you have LDPC decoder go in loops. It works.
So here, I mean, okay, for this LDPC codec system, you have like MMSC equalizer for OTFS, and then again basis passing decoder for LDPC. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I think participants, do you have any further questions? I do not find any questions in the chat box.
Okay.
I thank a lot. I mean, we spent almost 2 hours from starting from 11:30, almost 2 hours. So probably I will not disturb you in the lunch time. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for such a nice introduction and nice presentation.
Okay,
thank you,
Dr. Bega, and wish you all a very nice day. Bye bye.
Yes. Bye bye.